How an HOA destroyed my parents. So this happened almost 10 plus years ago, but has cemented my hatred for HOAs. My family is from Guam, a small Pacific island in U.S. territory where there isn't much, if any, HOAs. We moved stateside around 2001 and 2002 when my dad decided that he wanted to. My parents had good jobs and made good money and had decent credit. We lived in Tennessee for a while until we drove up to Indiana to visit some family. I guess my dad liked it so much that he decided to move there. Well, after my parents got transferred to their business's Indiana branch, a few months later, we moved there. Our house was very modest, but a bit more extra than most because it was a part of an HOA. A few months living there, my dad noticed a crack in the garage. It was a poor foundation, and notified our builder. The HOA was still being built, so he was easy to find. The builder said that he'd take a look. Come to find out that not only was the foundation poorly set, but the plot of land it was on was sinking, which is the screwed up thing number one. My parents were told that in order to fix it, it would cost more than their home loan because of the condition of the land it was on. The builder suggested that they pay him 25% cash of the home's value, and he'll build them a new house with their current mortgage, cut down 25% as a good faith gesture. Screwed up thing number two. As you're reading and listening to this, you're probably thinking, well, that can't be right. That's not legal. That's not how it works. Well, yeah, you're right, but being from a small island where you can trust someone at their word, it didn't occur to my parents to question it or get legal advice. Anyways, back to the story. So the new house is built, nicer than our previous home and not sinking. Life is good for a while until we had to go on an extended trip due to family emergency. Luckily, at this point, we'd been living there for years and my parents made some friends. We would have just left, but one of their friends let them know that they needed to inform the HOA that some lawn and garden standards wouldn't be kept due to the trip. Yes, my parents should have read the bylaws, but at first they were excited to own a home, so they never did. At the time of the emergency, they weren't thinking about anything but getting back to Guam. So my parents, still thinking that a face-to-face with the HOA board would be good enough, did just that. Told them during an HOA meeting, well, that's it. Well, our trip took a little while longer than expected. The whole summer and part of the first school year, but we finally got home. Waiting at our door were countless letters, warnings, fines, and more fines. Screwed up thing number 3. I don't exactly remember what was the total, but it really doesn't matter. My parents were broke. They spent their savings getting us to and from Guam and paying the mortgage, so yeah, no back fund. My parents went straight to the HOA for answers. Basically, it boiled down to, they didn't notify the HOA of the reason for the drop in standards, so they were well within their rights to post fines. And the worst part, put a lien on our home. My parents barely covered the mortgage and the trip to Guam. They tried reasoning with them until eventually they went to court. As you're guessing from the title, it didn't go well. The HOA board hung on to the fact that my parents didn't send an email and wait for board approval. They won. My parents were forced to pay the lien while also paying the mortgage. At first, my parents were optimistic, but it got to the point where it was pay the mortgage and fines or feed my brothers and I. They fell further behind and were starting to fight about it. It became too much for them, so they had to walk away from our home. My mom was devastated, and my dad felt like a failure. I was old enough to understand what was going on, but my brothers didn't know why we had to leave our home. The whole ordeal destroyed my parents' credit, wiped out their savings, and cost my parents their good job. Mom had a job in finance requiring good credit, and my dad had to work closer to home because of the financial situation. I don't think there's any way they can recover from what they walked away from, but they're not fighting and don't have to choose between paying rent and feeding my brother. The whole experience made me really hate HOAs. While I understand why they are needed, and in some cases make complete sense, I will never move my family into one if I can help it. Do you think the HOA should have shown grace? While they were technically within the rules, they definitely took advantage of them because, well, money, right? How would have you handled it? This HOA story has an update. My condo association experience has been interesting. 239 unit high-rise in Maryland that has major capital repairs underway. The building is 40 years old, and most residents are 60 plus and have lived here under a $300 a month condo fee up until 2015, basically free, not paying for, well, anything but the basic building bills. So now the fee is $640, and on January 1st will be $840. I found out that they're dumping $500,000 on HVAC units that are in the condos. There was an amendment that allowed them to do this in 2007 because it switched all of them over to Energy Star. This was good as a whole and legal because the building supplies electric, and electric had just been deregulated, not to mention tax credits. But nothing about the amendment replaced or overrides that the HVACs, PTACs, are owner's responsibility. It's listed specifically in a list of things that the owner is responsible for. Or the fact that bylaws state any repairs done in a unit by the association using common funds will be immediately assessed to the unit. So they just started replacing them again for free because the 2007 units can no longer be fixed. Oh yeah, they have been maintaining them the whole time. There is no PTAC made since 2009 that is not energy efficient, so there is no benefit to doing this. The building saved more than it spent on them in 2007 and 8. So as there is no longer a return on it, there is no basis of doing it, as now it is just an expense. They claim they own the units, which I never read or signed an agreement at closing stating of there being 3 common elements inside the 4 walls I purchased. Meanwhile, the one repair to the building is over $2 million, and they have automatic entrance doors, a fire pump, generator, and garage doors to go, at somewhere in the park of $400,000. So instead of stopping the illegal, according to the bylaws, free living insanity and having the ability to say money is earmarked for said repairs, they're choosing to continue what got the building here. 2 members of the board are related. After I called the HVACs out at a meeting, the president and a budget committee member resigned, and the board held a closed-door temporary appointment selecting another relative. 3 kin on a 7-member board. So here's the follow-up. To address the issue of the condo association replacing the PTAC's heating and cooling units, like in hotels, for free when our bylaws state 3 different ways that they're not to be doing it, at the cost of $70,000 a year, the board had to schedule a meeting for after the general meeting. My guess is so that we don't discuss it in front of the other members. They said they had to consult with their lawyer that they were meeting with the following day for a different issue. We got an email later that day from the president stating that our reading of the bylaws was correct, but they are going to continue to do so at their discretion. Huh? The bylaws clearly state what common funds can be used for, and if they are used for any repair inside of a private unit, that unit is to be given 10 days notice of pending repair. And once the repair is made, the condo unit is assessed and payable immediately. This led to, at the next meeting, the board crying they had to pay legal fees because they're not lawyers and they were challenged on something. Here's where it gets fun. At the same private meeting, we had to address an issue with our downstairs neighbor who aggressively, like pounding on our door like you see like when the U.S. Marshal delivers warrants, said that we were hammering on our floor at 1 a.m. over 2 nights. I work 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., so yeah, that's not us. He has mental issues, a violent history, and has suffered a brain injury on top of it. What he's hearing is the elevator brakes from the elevator control room 4 floors above. The sound radiates through the concrete floors or the ceiling, depending on where the lift cars are, making it sound in random places of the condo unit. Their solution was they want to inspect our unit to make sure it's 80% carpet, and we told them no. They said, well, how are we to make sure that you're in compliance? We told them in the state of Maryland you can only enter to investigate damage that threatens another unit or public safety, an emergency, or to get a limited common element to inspect, like a balcony or fire system. This is covered under Maryland 2018 Condo Act that they cite every meeting when talking about our reserve fund. Fast forward a week. We get a letter from their lawyer saying playing cat and mouse never ends well and we need to comply. So here we are with a long-sitting board that is cognitively on autopilot. Only 2 of the 7 are under 72 years old. A property manager that is to keep them away from breaking laws and civil rights, opening the COA to litigation, and an elderly real estate lawyer, 45 plus years practicing, that's never read the bylaws except for regulations for meetings and budget or the state law outside of mandatory budget requirements, a reserve study, and this is truly 3 blind mice. The pain is real. I hope they are dumb enough to file at this point. From all the communications, on paper at that, I swear they think it's 1995. The law was fast and loose back then. The lawyer may be a real estate lawyer, which is effective for foreclosing a lien, but he's not an HOA lawyer in the least. Don't waste your time and keep busy? Alrighty then. This happened back when I was in high school in my senior year. I worked as a cashier and bagger at a local grocery store, a pretty big chain in the mid-Atlantic US, and I started as a bagger and then was trained as a cashier after a year. I got paid a bit over minimum wage and usually worked between 25 to 36 hours a week, mostly 7.5-hour shifts so they didn't have to give me a lunch, just a 15-minute break, which I wasn't guaranteed. It was a pretty crap job and people were always calling off. If you've worked or do work in retail, you can probably guess why. So there was usually a lot of available shifts so long as you didn't go over on your hours. If you were part-time and over 18, like I was, you couldn't work more than 36 hours a week. At the time of this story, I had been working there for about 3 years and was well liked by mostly everyone. I had customers who would only check out with me if I was working, and I generally just kept busy if things were slow. I'd empty the trash cans under each register, refill the bags, and so on. My supervisors generally had me in the express lanes on Sundays, which was always our busiest day, because they knew I could do the job and would do it right. I didn't want to rise to checkout coach, which was a front-end supervisor, because that would mean full-time and no social life, so I was happy where I was. Important note, my store was known as a training store, meaning that we usually had a new manager every 6 months or so. We had a rotation of general managers who were regular, but always at least one manager in training. Generally, they'd move on after 6 months. Sometimes they came back as a department manager, I think like dairy or produce, but mostly we never saw them after their stint was up. Sometimes we got some pretty good ones. Most of them were not great. And then there was Mel. Mel was a manager in training when I started working at 15. She was and is also a lesbian. Being a lesbian in a small town where being anything but heteronormal in a predominantly red state in the early 2000s was, well, not very common. And Mel was a full-blown feminist lesbian. I don't know if she had a bad experience with men or generally just saw anything with a man as the source of all her troubles, but regardless, she generally didn't treat us guys very well. She had rotated out after 6 months, and then my senior year came back as the PM Front-End Manager, or FEM. This meant that she was in charge of the checkout area from about 3:30 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. After about 5, the GMs generally went home and the department managers usually left about the same time. So after 5 p.m., the front-end manager was usually the person in charge of the entire store. They could call a local GM should they absolutely need to, but they were expected to handle everything that came their way. Our story takes place in August 2007. I had turned 18 back in January. This meant that I could legally work up to 36 hours, and often did. I was also known as the person who would almost always come in if someone called off. Lo and behold, on a random Saturday afternoon, I took a shift working 4 to 11 p.m. as a bagger. I told the manager that I would have to clock out by 10:45 or it would put me over my hours, which the store could get in big trouble for. They said that would be fine. I took the call at 2:30 and I clocked in at 4 o'clock on the dot. I talked to the morning front-end manager to make sure I had to punch out by 10:45 and not a second later. Otherwise, the store could be in serious trouble. This is key for later. I said, sure, no problem. I remembered the AM front-end manager wrote it on the schedule that was kept at the front end. If you were on the schedule as a bagger, that is what you were. They could have you jump on a register if it got busy, but they tried to keep as few lanes open as they could. I was told by the morning front-end manager to jump on a register for a bit after work rush and then go out and do carts. I did this and promptly went outside to collect carts. It was a big lot, several acres, and people generally don't put carts in the corrals. As I was the only one doing carts, and the day shift slacked off as it was hot as heck that day, there were a lot of carts to collect. I spent a good hour getting the carts back in the store. When I came back in, the morning front-end manager was gone, and in their place was Mel. Mel and I usually butted heads at least once a month. Nothing terrible, but she was known for making me do crap parts of the job. One time, she made me pull an old cooler away from the wall to clean behind it because someone had spilled milk the day before and it had seeped underneath where the compressor was and so smelled horrific. despite having trained custodial staff. I'd have to mop floors, stock sugar and water, dust around registers, and so on. Mind you, she never made any of the girls do this, even if they were just standing around. Just us guys, and me in particular. I have no idea why she disliked me so, but she did, and it sucked. By this point, it was about 6:30. Most of the cashiers were cleaning their belts and then leaving once their shift was up. When I walked in from doing carts, Mel made a beeline for me and told me that I had to stock sugar and water immediately. Biting my tongue, I went to the back to grab a cart to stock sugar and water. This sucked because it was the store brand 5-pound sugar containers that were never sealed well and the massive 24-pack water. And while the sugar usually wasn't bad, on a hot day, the water tended to sell out quick, which meant lots of stocking. I spent another 30 minutes refilling the sugar and water. Before heading back up, I stopped to hit the head and hydrate. Once back up front, it was dead. One cashier, the checkout coach, and Mel. And then me. The cashier was a girl who I knew, and I had dated her best friend briefly and talked to every now and then. To keep from getting told to do something, I refilled the bags at the end of each lane and collected the baskets. By now, it was 7 o'clock. It was usually extremely dead at this point. Because there wasn't much to do, I started chatting with the cashier. All of a sudden, I hear my name being called. Mel said, "Austin, come here." I walk over to the front end counter where she and her friend, the checkout coach, were just talking before she saw me talking to the cashier. I said, "What's up?" "I know you like talking to the girls, but you're here to work, not waste my time. You know you're supposed to keep busy. You're wasting my time here. You can go and do garbage now and replace all the bags." I was ticked. Here I was working extra hours and I had to put up with Mel and being told I was slacking when it was known that I was a pretty good worker. But as I walked away, a plan formulated. Garbage was just that, collecting garbage. The store had approximately 50 garbage cans of all sizes inside the store, 4 outside by the entrances, 6 in the corrals, and 8 at the gas station that was approximately 200 yards away. Most of the bags were the big industrial size ones that you can fit a Mini Cooper in. Garage detail sucked, but generally, if the day shift did it in the morning, it wasn't bad, but they never did. We had to use what we called U-boats, which were inversed U-shaped handles, to collect garbage, which is about as useful as a tanning bed in the Sahara. You could only put a few bags on it at a time before it was full and you had to go slow so the bags didn't fall off and rip. Sometimes I'd tie the bags to the U-boat, but that meant that they were free to swing around. Because I just did the job the way they wanted, I was usually asked to do it, but only if the bags were full or ripped. Replacing all the bags, taking them through the store to the compactor, and doing a good job usually took a minimum of 2 hours, but usually closer to 3, which was part of my plan. And once you started garbage, you had to finish it, which was also part of my plan. See, management had problems with people timing it, so they had to leave before doing half the garbage. I remember going to the back and finding exactly 1 U-boat free. I always grabbed a new roll of bags when doing garbage. Usually, when doing garbage, I'd do the ones nearest the compactor first, so I didn't need to put them on the U-boat. I just carry them back. The only department I wasn't allowed to do was the meat department, which was probably a safety thing with the knives and equipment. So I did all the garbage in the back of the store first, and then worked my way forward, replacing all the bags as I went. Because the bags were huge, I'd have to tie them smaller so they'd fit the cans. While this isn't hard, they needed to be tight or the bag would fall inside the can and the can would need to be cleaned out using a hose and sanitizer, which I never understood this. I eventually make it to the front end where I go through and get the garbage from behind the front end. Mel usually watched me, like legit would turn around and watch me do garbage. The U-boat is full, so I wheel it back to the compactor, which is now full. As I was not a manager, I wasn't allowed to run it. So I had to go get Mel to run it, which there was a key to keep it off, which entailed her ordering me to stuff more garbage in it without helping me. The compactor really was just a dumpster that compacted the trash. The door we used only opened to the chute. You had to be careful to make sure the compactor was retracted before adding more garbage to the chute, otherwise it could damage the machinery. That was the story I was told. Mel, being the conscientious manager, made sure that it was retracted before I added more. The snag was, the machine was slow, especially when the dumpster was empty. There was no way to see how empty it was other than to just listen to it and stop it when it seemed to be under stress. As Mel was in a hurry to get back to the front end, ordered me to just stack the garbage in front of the door to the chute and then to let her know when I was done with garbage, then I could add the garbage to the chute with her running the compactor. Problem was, I was now heading outside. This was the part that took the longest, as cans next to the entrance were always full. The corrals were pretty far apart, and their cans were always full. I found a whole fake Christmas tree in a corral garbage can once. And then there was the gas station cans, which were always full. This was going to take at least an hour, and it was already about 9 o'clock. If I was in a hurry, which I wasn't. Why not, you ask? Because it was Saturday night, and Saturday night meant that the local farm took their migrant workers out to do their weekly shopping and to wire money back to their families via Western Union. And this farm employed a lot of migrant workers. Think of a couple school buses worth. And where was the local Western Union station? Behind our front end. Who was allowed to operate the terminal? Checkout coaches and managers. How long does it take to send one person's money? About 5 minutes. And I knew, because I knew the farmer, that he chose Saturday because that's usually when the Western Union terminal is free. He usually came around 9 o'clock or so. So I act all meek and mild and go outside to do garbage. I do the corrals first and then take them in and pile them up outside the compactor. The corrals cans were always disgusting. People put everything in those cans. As I'm going outside for the cans nearest the entrance, I see the farmer's bus pull into the lot. I counted as 32 workers get off the bus and walk into the store. I looked at my watch, and this is before cell phones, kiddos, and it is 9:15. Perfect. I take my sweet time doing the garbage by the entrance, and even got the one in front of Blockbuster just to use up more time, dragging my feet all the while. By now, it's 9:40. I take a load in. Mel is hard at work at the Western Union computer, wiring money. I'll say this for her, she worked hard. But it was bittersweet because these workers haven't been around women much, and even though they're speaking Spanish, they're talking to her and hitting on her. Mel, who is Hispanic but doesn't look it, understands every word. I'm sure it pained her little black heart to smile as each aggressively descriptive worker tried hitting on her or talking to her. I take the garbage back, piling up the bags in front of the chute. The pile is now waist high, and it reeks. It's August, remember? Back to the gas station. I take my sweet time and get all of the gas station bags and the bag in the hut in 2 trips. This takes another 45 minutes, mainly due to the slow butt walk back. Each time I make sure to just breeze back to the compactor, piling the bags and heading back outside. I made sure one bag ripped, so I had to stop and put that bag in another bag. Hey, we don't want to leave a mess now, do we? And then take it back inside. I drop off the U-boat and clean it off. We had to hose it down, otherwise the smell would be worse. We usually clean it off with a hose and some disinfectant. So I made sure that the U-boat was really clean. I spent 10 minutes hosing it down and getting it nice and purty. It is now 10:40, 5 minutes before I have to punch out. I walk very slowly up to the front end. Mel has gotten through about half of the migrant workers. The migrant workers are just shooting the bull and having a good time, not working and flirting with the cashier. Most of them went back to the bus to wait. I know some of them were not legal. I said, "Mel, the garbage, it's all done." She said, "What? Oh, good. Did you throw it down the chute?" "Nope, you told me to come find you so you could compact it." Just go back there and throw it in the chute. I'm busy." "Sorry, Mel, no can do." "What do you mean? Austin, go throw the dang garbage in the chute." I can't. I need to leave. I swear she turned tomato red. You can't leave. Go throw the garbage away and do it now. I'm writing you up for insubordination. Does that mean I get overtime pay? What? No. Why would you get overtime? Because I need to punch out in about a minute or I'll be over my hours and you'll have to explain to the GM why I have to get overtime pay. Your what? I explained quickly that I was already at my max hours for the week. The morning FEM, front end manager, had cleared this with the GM that I punch out at 10:45 p.m. and had written it down on the schedule. All the while, the checkout coach is trying to ring up some of the migrant workers and the cashier is signaling that she needs a manager's help. Mel looked like she was going to have a conniption, but she can't because my butt is covered. I punched out, grabbed my keys from my locker, and headed out the door. The cherry on top? I found out later that Mel had to throw the garbage out herself after it had sat in the back for several hours and blocked the door, meaning that she had to move each bag at least twice. Because the bags weren't the greatest quality, many of them ripped, spilling foul-smelling garbage everywhere, forcing her to then clean the floor. Food was stored there short-term before it was moved to the shelves. Since she was always a sharp dresser, I have no doubt she had to go get some clothes professionally laundered, if not just throw it out. It was almost 1 when she was able to leave, from what I heard. Even suckier for her, she was salaried, so it didn't matter how many hours she worked. She didn't get paid anymore. I wish I could say this stopped her being a royal witch, but it didn't. She couldn't say anything to me though, because I was just making sure that I didn't waste any more time and kept busy. The HOA demands that we follow their rules, but we aren't even in the HOA. Click the video on your screen so you don't miss the fallout of this one, and I'll see you there.